Imagine you're dead, and this is your funeral. I know it's crazy, but just imagine. And now, there's going to be 3 people. One is from your family. It can be your child or your sibling. The other one is from your career. It can be your boss or your coworker. And the last one is a friend. It can be any friend, or it can be your wife or your husband. And the 3 of them is going to give a speech at your funeral about your life. And here comes the important part. I want you to think about what kind of description do you want them to use while describing the kind of person you had been. What are some values you want them to say that you had lived throughout your life? Take a moment to think about it. And let me give you some examples. She was a risk taker. He was a nice person. She lived the life that she loved. He followed his dreams. I don't know. These might be important for you. But what is the use of it? The meaning of the exercise we just did is to help you to find what is important for you. Is to help you to find what are some values that you want to live throughout your life. Because it's obviously going to be a little too late to start thinking about what kind of life you want to live at your funeral. So from that practice, if there's a value that really stood out to you, you should really make sure that people say that at your funeral, meaning you should start living that value right now. If I want people to say that I was a hardworking person, I start working hard right now. And besides just thinking about the ones that we care, the ones that we want people to mention, think about the ones that we don't. And ask yourself, is there any value that I would not care at all after I die, but I care about it right now? For instance, do you want some people to go on your funeral and say, she was a great person because she was the most popular girl back in high school and every boy liked her? Is that something you want to be remembered for? Or is there something else, something more meaningful to you? So we're starting to see how many things we care about right now has nothing to do with our life values, meaning they have nothing to do with what we really desire deep down in our hearts, and how we spend so many time worrying about those things and forgetting what is important, what really matters, the thing that brings meaning to our life. And when discovering our values, it is very important to distinguish between value and goal. People tend to think that their life value is determined by how many goals they've achieved. For example, people might say, my life value is that I went to Harvard, or my life value is that I became a billionaire. Those are goals, but not value. A goal is a defined station. It's a certain level to achieve. And after you've achieved it, it became yours, but it's not gonna lead you forward towards the rest of your life. What I mean by that, here's an example. Many of us, we take AP. And if the exam is coming up next week, we will be motivated to study until the exam. But after we've taken the exam, we will be no longer motivated to study because we've already achieved it and it is done. But value is different. If a goal is a defined station, a value will be a direction with no end. And it will be there for your lifetime. And you don't need to reach the end to gain the value because you have them in you already. And as long as you are going toward the right direction, as long as you're on the right track, you are living your values. In the end, we need to be able to ask ourselves, what did I live and how did I live? These questions come back to what kind of life we are living right now. Matter of fact, many people are still living their life like animals. The value of life for animal is simply pleasure and reproduction. Sadly, that is exactly what many of us are searching for today. As human, we need more than that. And people tend to find pleasure instead of happiness. The reason is simple: pleasure is easier to find. But real happiness is only gained when you are discovering and performing your values, meaning when you are living your values. And it gives you more than just satisfaction, it gives meaning to your life. So after we know our life values, what kind of life we want to live, then what can we do in our daily life to build these values? Well, motivation is essential. What you do is determined by how you think. But you need to be motivated in order to start doing something. Motivation is not just a general idea. It is very interesting after you know how your motivation works. It is also really useful. People say that there are 5 levels of motivation, and everything we do fits in one of the levels. The first level of motivation, or what we call the lowest level of motivation, is when I do something because I have to. For example, for many of us, doing homework is motivated by the first level of motivation. I do it because I have to. Can you recall any teacher's homework that you hated doing, but you just had to? The second level of motivation is I do something so I became better than others. An important aspect of this motivation is that we need approval from the outside. We are searching for approval from the outside, meaning I do something so I become better than others, so people will like me. We need approval for our values, but the truth is, as soon as you start doubting your values, you've already lost it. Because the truth doesn't need to be defended, and you don't need anybody to admit your value if you have them in you. The third level of motivation is about curiosity and creativity. It's when you do something because you're curious, and you do not seek for outside approval. Many stories of successful people can fit into the third level of motivation. They believed in themselves, and they did not seek outside approval. They did not care about outside judgments. Instead, they focus more on the inside. Which level do you think babies are at? Fun fact, babies are at the third level of motivation. They are full of curiosity, and they do not care about outside judgments. So it's very interesting how we all started in the third level of motivation, but as we grow up, many of us fall into the first and second level of motivation. The fourth level of motivation is when I do something, and it is something that I love, it's something that I am passionate about, and at the same time, it helps others. Eventually, the last and the highest level of motivation. This level of motivation is hard to achieve. It's even a bit hard to understand. It is when you don't intentionally do anything, but life just expresses through you. You don't intentionally put any energy into it, but everything just happens by itself. It's like a flow, and some people call it the enlightened level. What we can learn from the 5 levels of motivation is that the higher the level of motivation, the easier our life becomes. What I mean by that is when you are at the lowest level of motivation, you put more energy into what you are doing because you have the least amount of motivation. So you suffer more. And when you're at the highest level of motivation, you don't need to put any extra energy into it because everything just happens by itself. So when you find yourself struggling at doing something, try to adjust your motivation. And what do you think is your biggest motivation for life? The motivation that proves life is worth living, the motivation that pushes you forward every single day. And which level of motivation does that belong to? Keep these questions in mind, and we will move on. So now, we know what kind of values we want to live, and we've distinguished our motivations. We start performing, we start discovering, we start living, we start trying. And now comes my favorite part, failure. Yes, we might fail, but it's something that we can't avoid, and it's something that we don't need to avoid. It's just life. We learn from the good. We enjoy the good, and we learn from the bad. And remember that the more challenge you face, the stronger you become. We need to understand why we hate failure so much. The truth is, failure itself is never what we suffer through. What we suffer through are the emotions we create after we failed at something. For example, I tried something, I failed. I feel sad, I feel angry, disappointed, embarrassed, hopeless, and these negative emotions are causing me so much pain, and eventually I came up with a conclusion of, I'm not good enough. So this is the process. First, you tried something, you failed. And then negative emotions emerge. Eventually, you came up with a conclusion of, I am not good enough. But we need to be reflective, we need to be critical, and ask ourselves, is this true, that I am not good enough? Why do I believe in this? Why do I believe in my emotions? Because remember, you are not your emotions, and your emotions do not define who you are. When emotions come, we just have to let them in, but not holding on to them. And the value inside of you will never be taken away, no matter how many times you failed, because they are yours. And as long as you live, those values will be with you. And everybody's life has value. Just because we might not have noticed it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And do remember that success is just going from failure to failure, but not losing enthusiasm. We need to be willing to fail and be willing to face our challenge and overcome them. And the real failure is not that you tried something and you did not succeed. The real failure is not to try. We might learn more from our failures than we do from success, but not trying in order to avoid failure gives us nothing. So I encourage you to try, to follow the direction of your values, the values that you feel passionate for, the values that brings meaning to your life. I encourage you to try, I encourage you to fail and learn from those failures and stand up and start running again. And lastly, please remember that the wind of luck is always blowing, but we need to set the sail. Thank you very much.